Robot by Isaac Asimov. Retold version. Robbie. 98, 99, 100. Gloria was counting while standing by a tree. She shouted the numbers and opened her eyes, looking around. She couldn't see Robbie anywhere. Slowly, she moved away from the tree. Maybe he went into the house, the little girl thought. That's wrong. He's cheating. He shouldn't play the game that way. I've told him lots of times. Gloria began to walk toward the building. She did not hear the sound until it was too late. The metallic clump, clump, clump of Robbie's metal feet echoed through the air. The tall robot had left his hiding place and was running toward the tree. "Wait, Robbie," Gloria shouted. "You aren't allowed to run until I find you." Gloria started to run toward the tree, but Robbie was much faster. Then, about 10 feet from the tree, Robbie suddenly moved more slowly. Gloria ran past him and touched the tree first. "Robbie can't run," the 8-year-old child shouted. She jumped up and down, laughing happily. "I won." Of course, Robbie did not answer because he could not speak. He moved away until Gloria ran after him, but she moved too slowly. She could not catch him. At last, she stood and laughed. "Stop, Robbie," she shouted. "Stand still. I'm going to hide now." Robbie obeyed Gloria's order. He nodded his head, turned his face to the tree, and closed his eyes. Now Gloria ran to find a hiding place. After exactly 100 seconds, the robot's red eyes opened, and he looked around. Immediately, he knew that Gloria was behind a large rock. He saw part of her dress. Slowly, Robbie moved towards the little girl's hiding place. He pointed one arm toward her and banged his other arm against his metal leg. Gloria stepped away from the rock. "You're cheating," she cried. "Oh, I'm tired of this game. I don't want to play it anymore. I want to ride." But Robbie shook his head and looked at the ground. "Robbie, I was wrong," said Gloria nicely. "You weren't cheating. I'm sorry. Please, give me a ride." But Robbie just shook his head again. "You'd better let me ride on your shoulders," she cried. "If you don't, I won't tell you any more stories." So Robbie carefully lifted the little girl and put her onto his strong, wide shoulders. Then he ran to some tall grass that grew on the other side of the yard. He stopped and gently put Gloria down onto the soft grass. Gloria laughed happily. Robbie waited and then gently pulled her hair. "Do you want something?" Gloria said, smiling. The robot pulled her hair again. "Oh, I know what you want," she said. "You want to hear a story?" Robbie nodded his head quickly. "Oh, okay," said Gloria. "Once upon a time there was a beautiful little girl whose name was—" As Robbie listened, his red eyes shone brightly. Gloria had just reached the most exciting part of the story when they heard a shout. "Gloria!" The woman's voice was sharp and impatient. "Mama's calling me," said Gloria. She sighed. "Take me back to the house, Robbie." Robbie quickly obeyed. He lifted Gloria onto his shoulders again. He always obeyed Mrs. Weston immediately. Gloria's father was a nice man, but Gloria's mother made Robbie nervous. The robot nanny and the child reached the house. "Gloria," Grace Weston said angrily, "where were you?" "I was with Robbie, Mama," Gloria replied. "You may go now, Robbie," Mrs. Weston said, "and don't come back until I call you." Robbie turned to go. "Wait, Mama," Gloria cried. "Please let him stay. I was telling him a story and I haven't finished." "Gloria," her mother said. "Please, Mama," Gloria said. "He'll be good." "Gloria," said Mrs. Weston, "stop this immediately, or you won't see Robbie for a week." "Okay," said Gloria. There were tears in her eyes. "But I was telling Robbie his favorite story and—" The robot looked at the ground as he slowly walked away. George Weston was comfortable. It was Sunday, the only day of the week that he did not work. On Sunday, George enjoyed a good lunch. Then he liked to sit and read the newspaper. So, he was not pleased when his wife walked into the room and stood beside him. For a few minutes he went on reading about the expedition to Mars. Mrs. Weston waited patiently for 2 minutes. Then she waited impatiently for 2 more minutes. Finally, she spoke. "George," she said. Weston put down the paper and turned toward his wife. "What is it, dear?" he asked. "George, it's Gloria and that terrible machine," she said. The robot that Gloria calls Robbie. He doesn't leave her for a minute." "Well, that's his job," Mr. Weston said. "Robbie is Gloria's nanny, and he certainly isn't a terrible machine. He's the best robot there is." "Listen to me, George," Mrs. Weston went on angrily. "I don't want a machine to take care of my daughter. Nobody knows what it's thinking." Weston frowned. He was feeling a little angry, and his face showed that he did not understand why there was a problem. "Robbie has taken care of Gloria for 2 years," he said. "I wasn't worried at first," said Grace. "But—" George interrupted his wife. "Grace," he said, "Robbie was made to take care of a little child. He was made to be gentle and nice. But something might happen, and that thing will go crazy, and—" Grace couldn't finish her sentence. "That's impossible," George said. "We discussed the first law of robotics when we bought Robbie. You know that a robot cannot harm a human. Anyway, you can't take him away from Gloria. She loves Robbie." "But George," Grace said, "Gloria won't play with the other children. She only wants to be with that machine. We've got to get rid of that horrible thing. It frightens me. You can sell it back to U.S. Robots. I've asked someone at the company about it." George was much angrier now. "No, Grace," he said. "We're keeping the robot until Gloria is older. I don't want to hear any more about it." Mr. and Mrs. Weston argued about Robbie for a week, and each time Mr. Weston said, "Robbie stays." But each time his reply was weaker. Finally, Weston went to speak to his daughter. "Should we go to a Visivox show downtown?" he asked her. "Oh, yes," said Gloria. "Can Robbie go too?" "No, dear," her father replied unhappily. "But you can tell him about the show when you get home." And he turned away. He could not look at his daughter's face. Gloria and her father arrived home. "The Visivox was wonderful," the little girl said as she jumped out of the car. "I have to tell Robbie all about it." She ran into the yard, but Robbie was not there. She searched through the house, but he was not there. At last, she went to her parents. "Mama, where's Robbie?" she asked. Mrs. Weston held her daughter in her arms. "Don't feel bad, Gloria. Robbie went away." "He went away," Gloria cried. "Where did he go?" "We've searched everywhere, but we can't find him," said Mrs. Weston. Will he ever come back?" said Gloria. She was crying now. "Gloria, Robbie was only a machine," her mother said. "He was not only a machine," she cried. "He was my friend. I want him back, Mama." "She'll stop crying soon," Mrs. Weston said to her husband. "In a few days, she will have forgotten that horrible robot." Gloria stopped crying, but she stopped smiling too. She did not want food, and she did not want to play. The little girl became very quiet, and her mother became worried. One evening, Grace walked into the living room where George was reading the newspaper. He looked up at his wife. "What's wrong now, Grace?" he asked. "It's Gloria," Grace replied. "She's so unhappy." "Maybe we should get Robbie back," he said. "No," said Grace. "I've had an idea. Gloria can't forget Robbie when she's here. We have to take her to New York." "New York! The city is horrible in August." "Well, we have to go," Grace said. "Gloria will see new things there. She'll meet new friends, and she'll forget that machine." Gloria's parents told her about the trip to New York, and she was very pleased. When the day of the trip arrived, the little girl was smiling happily. As they were traveling to the airport in a taxi grow, she suddenly turned toward her mother. "I know why we're going to the city, Mama," she said. "We're going to find Robbie, aren't we?" When her mother did not answer, Gloria repeated her question. "Maybe," Mrs. Weston replied angrily. It was the year 1998 AD, and there were many things for visitors to do and see in New York City. The Westons went to the top of the tall Roosevelt building and looked down at the city. They visited museums and zoos. They went along the Hudson River in an old boat. Gloria and her parents traveled up into the stratosphere in a spaceship. They went down into the inn in a submarine. And the family went shopping. But Gloria was only interested in robots. Mrs. Weston did not want to see any robots, but Gloria wanted to see them all. One day, at the Museum of Science and Industry, Gloria disappeared. Her parents searched for many minutes. At last, they found her in a room with the speaking robot. "Gloria, why did you run away?" her mother asked angrily. "Came to see the speaking robot, Mama," Gloria replied. "I thought that he might know where Robbie was." The little girl started crying. "I've got to find Robbie, Mama." Mrs. Weston did not know what to do. That evening, George Weston went out alone. When he returned, he looked happy. "I've had an idea," he said to his wife the next morning. "We're not going to buy back Robbie from U.S. Robots," Grace said. "No," George replied. But Gloria thought that Robbie was a person. He was her friend. So, of course, she can't forget him. We need to show her that Robbie wasn't human. She needs to understand that he was just some pieces of metal with electricity. Then she'll forget him. "How can we do this?" Grace asked. "I've spoken to the general manager of U.S. Robots," George said. "He will show us the factory where the robots are built. Then Gloria will understand that a robot is not alive." "George, what a good idea," Mrs. Weston said happily. Mr. Weston smiled. Mr. Struthers, the general manager of U.S. Robots, liked talking. He was taking the Westons on a tour of the factory. Mrs. Weston was not interested in robots, but she asked Mr. Struthers to explain several things. She wanted her daughter to understand everything about robots. However, George Weston was becoming impatient. "Can we see the area where only robots work?" he asked. "Oh, yes, yes," said Mr. Struthers, smiling. "Robots making robots. Yes, of course. Follow me." Struthers took the Westons to a large room where a lot of robots were working together. "There," Struthers said proudly. "Robots working alone and safely. There have been no accidents here with the robots." Gloria was not listening. In this room there were no people at all, but there were 6 or 7 robots that were working at a table in the middle of the room. Then Gloria looked more carefully. She was not sure, but one of the robots looked like... It was! "Robbie!" Gloria shouted excitedly. As she ran across the room toward Robbie, she did not see the huge tractor that was coming toward her. The 3 adults watched, horrified. They could not move. George started to run after his daughter, but he was too slow. The tractor was going to hit Gloria, but Robbie moved immediately, and very fast. In a second, his long legs had taken him to the little girl. He caught one of her arms and pulled her from the path of the tractor. Half a second later, the tractor drove over the exact place where Gloria had stood. Gloria's parents ran to their daughter and held her tightly. Gloria laughed. She did not realize that she had been in danger. She had found her friend, Robbie. Mrs. Weston put down her daughter and turned to her husband. "You planned this, didn't you?" she said angrily. "You knew that Gloria would find him. Robbie wasn't designed to work here." "Yes, Grace. I knew that Robbie would be here," said George. "But I didn't know that this would happen. And Robbie saved Gloria's life. You can't send him away again." Grace Weston turned and looked at Gloria and Robbie. Robbie was holding the little girl in his strong metal arms. His red eyes shone brightly. "Okay, George," said Mrs. Weston finally. She sighed. "He can stay with us.